Good morning. Yes. Good morning. Welcome to Vanderbilt Divinity School. This morning, it is my pleasure to introduce our speaker, who is known to many of you. The Dr., the Reverend Emilie M. Towns is a distinguished scholar and a leader in theological education, and she's the dean here at Vanderbilt Divinity School. She is also the E. Rhodes and Leona B. Carpenter Professor of Womanist, Ethics, and Society. Her reflections this morning, Talk That Talk, Reflections from the Dean. She will reflect on our troubling times based on being a Christian social ethicist and the implications and challenges we face here at the Divinity School, as well as in our religious and social communities and the broader society. Please join me in offering a warm welcome.
Good morning, everyone. It's good to see you. And to see eyes open in some fashion. And I'm going to depart. Those of you who come almost every year know that it's usually an extemporaneous talk that I give. But, excuse me, Shatika Brown, where are you, Shatika? Shatika convinced me that I needed to talk a bit more about the times. And I said, do you really think people want to get up at 7:30 in the morning and get indigestion? And she assured me that if you start a conversation, they will follow. So brief remarks, and then I want to open up the floor for us to talk together, because I think I am not alone in this room at being very troubled by our country, our state, and our city these days, and then it goes global. So, I have been trying to understand evil all of my life. Not the individual acts of sin, but what I call systemic evil. Racism, sexism, classism, heterosexism. I'm trying to avoid or stop using the word homophobia because I agree with Valerie Bridgman, who says, these people aren't afraid, they're just mean. She opts for the use of the term homoaggression. I have come to understand evil as a cultural production. And by this, it's what I'm saying when I say that, it's the ways in which a society can produce misery and suffering in relentlessly systematic and structural ways. We are, my friends, a complicit society. We allow hatred to grow in the lost and in the found. We nurture hatred through small, everyday actions and inactions. And I think our job as faithful disciples is to build a more just, a more loving, a more peaceable society. And so we need to harness the power of love over hate. But we are too meek and mild with that love too often. The love I'm talking about is not being nice. It's not a love that tolerates. It's not a love that accepts foibles as inevitables and then doesn't seek to help us or others change. In short, I don't think we love ourselves. We mistake hoarding for self-love and self-care. And we have become cavalier about each other's lives as a nation. We have not yet decided that we have reached the point of saying enough. in an unloving society. The kind of love I'm talking about is not romantic. It is a love forged out of the gospel call to dig deep into our innards and find the spaces of compassion sequestered there, to pull them out into our social and political lives, to create a society that values the great diversity of folks who shape us as a nation. The kind of love we tend to practice is not this kind of love. It is hoarding. It is protecting what we have, protecting who we are, circling the wagons around our ideas and beliefs, failing to look up and out into the faces of the manyness of this country. In the midst of myriad injustices that make up everyday life for far too many of us, in a world that is a spinning top of wars and its brother and sister forms of violence, even this summer, the first anniversary of the Charleston massacre was marked by the blood of queer lives and the collateral damage done to their families and friends, and many of us who were horrified that someone would gun down people in cold blood for little reason beyond violent hatred and loathing. We live in a time where the disregard for human lives in general is astoundingly sanctioned by a legal system that fails all of us, when black and brown and native lives are taken and no one is responsible. When we recoil in horror at the massacre of 49 folk in Pulse nightclub, but we cannot get Congress to enact common sense gun laws because of an overzealous, and I would argue a very idiosyncratic reading of the Second Amendment, and being more concerned about being reelected or getting elected than governing this nation, state, and city. This inept brand of politics has caused us to stumble into what has become a halting democracy rather than a vibrant one. We are living in a world and a nation in which we have to say over and over again that Black lives matter as we view the videos of Alton Sterling's death, Philando Castile's death, and now Terrence Carruthers' death at the hand of police officers in Baton Rouge, Falcon Heights, and now Tulsa. I think it's a shame that black folks and our allies have been saying that we matter since this country has become a republic and united itself around the notion of freedom. But we began on this bad foot of Article 1, Section 2 of the U.S. Constitution in 1787 that declared that for the purposes of representation in Congress, enslaved blacks in a state would be counted as 3/5 of the number of white inhabitants of that state. Enslavement, written into the founding document of our country, is something we have never fully reckoned with as a nation. And we have been reaping this bad seed of a beginning ever since, while trying to ignore the fact that we do not legally, politically, socially, or theologically always practice the belief that all lives matter. The murders of Sterling, Castile, and Crutcher also revealed the awful fact that this brand of tragedy has become routine. The videos of their deaths allow us to bear witness, but it is not necessarily bringing justice. And it is not justice when a sniper guns down police officers in Dallas or opens fire outside of Bristol, Tennessee with the intent of killing police officers. Vigilante justice, no matter who is doing it, is not justice. And it does not bring in the world of respect for all lives I believe most of us believe in and yearn for and are trying to figure out how to bring into being. But our lack of love for ourselves and each other, our ease with killing one another, our justification of taking lives has pointed us to a wrong-heading notion of what living and maintaining a civil society is all about. Due process at the end of a gun will not get us the country and world we want. Disregarding lives because we have bought into a fantastic hegemonic imagination that tells us that people are dangerous and an enormous threat if we do not know or understand them. So it's best to shoot first and not be held accountable later. It causes the anger and despair of watching folks get killed over and over again and deciding that the only response is to take up a gun and begin killing police officers as a warped retributive justice. I think we must stop and look at ourselves, all of us, take an accounting of how we sanction or contribute to the madness that has overtaken us, a calculating, hoarding madness that fails to take in the complexity of this nation and our world. The rising death toll and the classism, sexism, racism, heterosexism, transsexism, militarism, and more that fuel this disregard for human lives will not stop the violence until we decide to stop them and then act to make it so. So I have a little, since that's such an upper this morning, I have a really rough sketch of what this might look like. It's not original, I don't think. I'm sure somebody else thought some version of this, but I want to share it with you this morning as I think through, what does love look like? What does this love look like that I'm arguing we should be for? It begins with empathy. And you can actually begin anywhere in this little diagram I have here. It's linear, but it's not. Empathy, not sorrow, not tolerance, but what empathy gets at is living deep into the lives of others, dwelling with them, and not just looking at them. It involves understanding and education. We have to get a little bit busy of understanding all the vast cultural settings we have in this country. One of the things that we've been talking about with a working group I established this year was the fact that even on this campus in this school, where we are sort of leading ahead diversity initiatives across the university, we still don't know each other's cultures. We're still having to learn what the shorthand we're using with each other and among each other, and understand the cues, understand the microaggressions, understand the possibilities, understand that we're better when we know more. Not just book learning, but people living. We have to do that. And with that, I don't think violence based on the isms is an aberration of the human will. I don't. We train ourselves into that. We train ourselves into that. And it's also not a surprise that we can predict or interrupt. It is. If you teach a child to be afraid of someone because of their gender or their color or their position in life or where they go to church or synagogue or mosque or where they, you name it, you must be afraid. You must look again. That's the first step to breeding hatred. That's the second step to breeding violence. So we train ourselves by not exposing ourselves to difference. That means we must give up something. To learn other people's lives is to give up something in order to gain something. And the something we give up often is ignorance. Well-intentioned sometimes, but it's ignorance. And what we gain, I think, I hope, bless you, I pray, is compassion. That's what education and understanding is all about. And then the next, if we're going to go linear, is revelation. The aha moment that I can change, my perspective of someone has changed, my understanding of something has changed, we can move in different directions, we don't have to stay on this train of iniquity, we can be better. And that's something that I argued for in the opening convocation address. We are better than this. We are better than who we are right now. And I want to join you and others into living into that better, into living into this love. Revelation helps us get there. And then you have to take a self-inventory. Have to look at the person in the mirror and go, oops or yay. And sometimes both. But self-inventory, self-reflection, honesty, as James Baldwin recalls in his book, Just Above My Head, now I'm forgetting the Baldwin books. His last collection of essays that's about that thick. Thank you. The Price of the Ticket, and the lead essay in that book, The Price of the Ticket. You got to do your first works over. And by that, it means you look at the journey you have traveled thus far, and you tell the truth about it. You don't brag. It's not about bragging. It's not about mourning and wailing and weeping. It's about telling the fullness of your life and saying, where have I been and where can I go? That self-inventory is so important because I think that it leads to us being new people, new beings, to use Tillich. New beings that are then ready to take action. An action that is strategic, it is structural, it may be individual, but it can also take on the larger systems. But an action that is girded with the notion that we can change into that new heaven, that new earth. And I believe that with all of my lives. That's how I try to lead this Divinity School. I believe that right here, right now, the Divinity School, if we work hard enough, will be adequate representatives of the new heaven and new earth that I dream a world about. And that leads to justice. And as Cornel West and others have said, justice is what love looks like in public. Justice is what love looks like in public. So, I hope I've opened the door to ideas, insights, questions, whatever. And I want to open up the floor now and wait for Shatika to come, because this is being taped, so whatever I say or you say, the world will know one day. Please, questions, insights, objections, agreements. We do it all here this morning. All right, family.
since no other hands went up, I will ask two questions. One of them, you talked about and I'm not sure who the scholar was that you referenced, who talked about racism and sexism, ageism, and the other isms as an expression of evil. Recognizing that some of those things are born of fear, at least initially, I'm wondering, do you have any thoughts, or have you encountered any thoughts of any other people about what the mechanism is that allows for fear to then transform itself into hate? Like, at what point does a fear that a person feels within them become the hatred that we see expressed through outward actions, is question one.
Yeah, I don't know. And so I'm going to put Professor Shepard on the spot, because she does the mind and I do other things.
I think you touched on it. I think it transforms from fear into violence and hatred when what one has to give up feels so essential to oneself and one's group that one's willing to do great violence to end it and prevent it.
That's a perfect answer, because it segues into my second question, which in inviting us to this greater knowledge which will allow us to do better in realizing justice, do you have any specific advice to give to all of us here about how we can approach this undertaking to gain additional knowledge while at the same time guarding against the ignorance that sometimes comes along with the illusion of certitude? Mm-hmm. Like, once we think we can enclose the understanding of another group of people, that in and of itself then becomes a barrier to further understanding. So how do we enter into this work of knowing more about another group of people while recognizing that that knowledge will never be complete, mm-hmm. and at the same time honoring that group?
Well, I think this is where humility comes in. That we live in a kind of world, and even an educational environment, that likes answers. And that's one of the reasons why when I work with students, I teach them how to ask questions. Because questions keep opening your world up if you do them well. So I teach them how to do questions well. And there's a sense of arrogance when we think we know something. I mean, I got a lot of D's behind my name. PhD, whatever D. But one of the advantages I had growing up in an academic household where my parents were D'd up too, is the one thing they started talking about with me at a very young age is, there's a whole world you will never know. And if you are so certain, you will never get anywhere near it. So remain open. And that's one of the things that is so hard for us, because we're often asked to be experts. But an expert doesn't mean you know everything. In fact, the best experts know exactly what they don't know, and can share that with folks as well. And so for me, it's a shift of, no, don't look for being an expert. Your degree program will make you dangerous. You'll get just enough knowledge. But think of it as a journey of discovery, a journey of faith, a journey of discipleship. Fill in the blank for that last word and keep going. Don't just rest with one image for ourselves. Because so much, I think, of what makes us live far behind our faith statements is our fear of being wrong and our inability to admit that, because the communities of faith we're in doesn't like for anybody to be wrong. So we're not living up to ourselves. I think we need to give ourselves more credit for our faith than that.
Good morning, Dean. I
Good
have a
morning.
question along the same lines of what you were talking about earlier. a lot of social scientists have been talking about the new generation, the millennials, and it's now being called the me generation. It's about me, it's my truth, it's my beliefs. And as you said, we are better, but they're seeing kind of like a stopgap between relationships millennials have with actual people outside of like the zone of social media and phone and internet. And I am on the millennial spectrum, so I understand. But as well as like understand that humility you were talking about, because again, it is about me, what I believe, my truths. Can you talk a little bit about how do we move from that me generation to the us? Because it seems to be a really big problem, especially those getting into academia, coming out of college now, where they're so focused on their beliefs, they're not willing to be humble or use the humility to learn about other people and their struggles.
You're describing one end of the spectrum of millennials, and that's the one that gets pressed because that's the one that's bad. And bad makes a lot of press in this country. But the other side, and it's a continuum, the other side are millennials who are seen as bleeding hearts into every social cause the good Lord ever sent on earth and beyond. I think millennials are much more complex than we give you guys credit for. And when we try to capture any generation in a few words, we've missed most of that generation. That said, for those who are part of the me generation, my question is, what me is going to be there when you're about to die? Who's going to be there to take care of you in old age? Me can't do it. I'm at that age now. Well, both my parents are gone, but my spouse's parents are very much alive, and one has Alzheimer's, and the other has chronic type 1 diabetes that appeared at age 78. They can't be me and survive. So one of the things that I think is so important is remembering you're building a life journey, not a moment in time. And how and who will you need in that life journey? My 83-year-old aunt lives with us. Lord Jesus. She jacks us up all the time. Why are you doing that? You need to, she does the 83-year-old thing. That's what little old black ladies do, and I suspect some other little old ladies as well. And one of the things, she was telling me the story, she was reflecting on her life. And she said, before you were born, I was selfish, I was self-centered, and I think probably I was mean. And I looked around one day and realized I had no friends. And she said, for some reason, I started to look ahead in my life. And I realized if I kept up my ways, there would be no one there to care for me. I think opening up our lives, looking ahead in our journeys, helps us. It doesn't guarantee it, but it helps us move into a better sense of there's a world around me that doesn't just look like me and mine and ours. It's a world we all need. And walking into that world, you can keep your meanness with you, but that meanness has to go into community. It has to go into systems. And one of the things that's so disturbing is when you see that playing out in politics, a me politics, which then only a few people really get to participate in, and a lot of people get fooled.
You said at this point in our culture, it's pretty bad. Where do you see us in 10 years?
God, I hope not here. I think if we dig in, excuse me, if we dig in, if we become the people we say we want to be, if we work for understanding in ourselves and with others, I think we will make a dent into where we are right now. Because we didn't just get here. How old is this country? No, we're not 300 yet. 240. It took 240 years to get to now. We have to take the long view. And I'm just one of those who believes we can. If our religious households start acting out of the fullness of what they say they believe. That's one of the key, for me, that's one of the linchpins. Because all of our religions, at least the mainline dominant big 3, 4, however many there are now, all mirror too much civil religion as opposed to faith statements. So if we can get back to that and realize that, building bigger houses of worship does not mean the Lord is going to bless you right now. That's something that happens in the heart. That's something that happens in community. And that's something that means you give instead of hoard your stuff. Because I think faith is a gift, it's not a possession.
I'm not from the me generation. I'll be 74 next month, so I'm from many generations before the me generation. And I think a lot of the problem lies with my generation, in that many of us, the older we grow, the more narrow we become. I was blessed in many ways to grow up in the military and to grow up all over the world. So I had the opportunity as a young child to sort of walk in other folks' shoes and to recognize and realize that we were all different, yet we were all basically the same. And I think perhaps, I don't know whether that's what sparked within me a sense of community and culture and so forth that's international. Or I don't know whether that it's the way God made me. But I'm not like many of my friends, and I say that because I'm in the midst of there's a high school reunion going on right now of other colleagues of mine that grew up in the military as well. And we went to high school in a place called Goose Bay, Labrador, which is way up in the cold country. And it's interesting, I sit with them and I have very little in common with them. You know, we grew up in the same environment, but the older I've grown, as opposed to moving more to the right, I've moved more to the left, because I've had the opportunity to be supported, to go inside and figure out who I really am and what my values really are. And I think that that's something we all have a responsibility to do. And until we can learn to like and love ourselves, warts and all, I mean, the good with the bad, because none of us are perfect, nor will we ever be. And the more we strive for perfection, the more we build up walls and start going the other way and hoarding, as the dean reflected. But my sense is that the more I can learn about me, the more authentic I become to be able to share with you. And the more authentic I become, that gives you the opportunity to also step into that place. So that it's a responsibility we all have to take that first step and not just speak words, but make actions. And part of this, I say, is a selfish way. I have the opportunity to make my profession now as a life coach. And life coaches ask questions. You know, when I was a little girl, my mother would say, if you just keep your mouth shut and behave, you'll get your questions answered, with her teeth clenched because I embarrassed her a lot. And I'd say, but nobody has my questions. And you know, God has such a great sense of humor, because now as an old woman, my profession, I ask questions. But it's questions that allow people the opportunity to think and to sit and listen. Because we do all have our answers inside if we just listen. And if we can listen to each other, that affords that dialogue, and not think we know because we don't know. I don't know anything about you. I don't live in your head, your heart, your brain, your gut. You know, I live in mine, not yours. So I think there's hope, but I think it takes a lot of work on our individual parts.
Thank you.
So really adding to that, yes, I think it's important for us to all look at ourselves, but we can't put off the relationships we build with others. And one of the things the Divinity School has certainly helped reinforce with me, as well as some of the other work I do in my church and society, is developing the curiosity about others and trying to set aside all of the stereotypes and all the things our society tries to tell us about people that we don't know anything about, and have the courage to be curious and ask questions of others and try to learn about what their experience is in our world, because that does a tremendous amount to help us build those bridges and better understand our world and the justice issues that we need to engage in.
Thank you. Hold on. Well, Professor Shepard's been trying to get in.
I just wanted to ask, I know that you have written about spirituality, and I'm wondering how this sketch you've given us and what you see going on now, how it shapes how you talk about spirituality now.
Thank you. The name of the book is In a Blaze of Glory. Womanist Spirituality as Social Witness. And actually, I'm teaching the class that book sparked right now. Saturday mornings from 9 to 2. 7 Saturdays, all not in a row. And I realized looking back, I realized I was born in a church where the minister who was formative for me, and this was I'm American Baptist now, but this was a United Methodist church at the time. He combined a rich spirituality for us to live into. But I was also growing up in the 60s, and he was on the protest line. And he also helped us see, and even the little kids got this, that your faith must be lived. Spirituality must be social witness. And so I didn't realize that was the way I had been formed until I started to think through, why is it that I believe so deeply in the richness of forms of spirituality, but I also can't stop protesting. In junior high school, we were bused to a predominantly white school, the beginning of desegregation in Durham, North Carolina, where I grew up. So we all knew the black kids because there weren't that many of us. There was about 20 in the school. And then when I moved on to high school, it was the first year of official desegregation, and all hell broke loose. The Ku Klux Klan, the Black Panthers, and the Communist Workers' Party were all in our high school recruiting youth members. We didn't know, we were just trying to go with somebody who made sense to us. But it was out of that I became a student activist in high school, because what I also saw was the kids that always got the short end of the stick were poor, black or white, didn't matter, were poor, their parents weren't highly educated, and they ended up in detention all of the time. Whereas I, middle-class black kid, parents well known in the community, I could do all manner of nefarious things, like doing teacher surveys. And I wouldn't be touched. And I said, there's something wrong with that. And about that point, my parents were like, where are you getting this stuff from? And without missing a beat, because it was true, the church, this is what you all taught us. And they sort of, oh. They didn't realize that some of us would take what we were learning seriously from the pulpit and from Sunday school classes, that all people are equal. I mean, I actually believe the song, Jesus loves all the little children of the world, red and yellow, black and white, we are precious in his sight. I actually believe that stuff. It was deep in. And so this model comes out of that wedding of a spirituality that sustains in the midst of joy and oppression, that encourages me to keep moving and not be satisfied, to find communities in which I will keep growing and will hopefully contribute to those communities to help them keep growing, to not be self-satisfied. And the fact that we take that into the world. Justice is what love looks like in public. By the book, it's still one of my favorites. Mark?
Thank you, Emilie. As the university chaplain, I'm thinking maybe you can help me figure something out here. It has to do with social, fervent engagement and empathy, and how you can do both at the same time. That is, here at this university, I'm working with colleagues all the time trying to figure out how we can establish, or at least inspire, rules of social engagement. And there are different models, and there's, within the world of higher education and American higher education, it's complete chaos right now. But I believe that creation comes out of chaos, so that's not necessarily a bad thing. On one end of the spectrum, we have the University of Chicago that sort of shows us the open forum of which basically says, if your feelings are not heard on a daily basis, we're not doing our job. On the other side, we have the totally closed forum, which says if your feelings are ever heard, we're not doing our job. And so what do you think? How should we steer this course? Because I think there is wisdom to be extrapolated from both of these camps, and yet we are oftentimes being drawn to an either or.
Most of the time, I don't think dualisms do us any good. That reality says that we live in the both and all the time. And that's the ethicist coming out in me. And so if we live in that both and, what can we learn about how hard it is to learn new things? that involve the heart, maybe even more than the head. And I just don't know of very many forms of growth that don't require an ouch every once in a while. Doesn't have to be a big ouch. It could be a little ouch, but it's one where you realize, ooh. And sometimes it's a ah. To be afraid of the oohs means we miss out on the ahs. So finding that middle ground of engagement where, and the one thing that I haven't talked about, I don't think any of us have talked about this morning, is the importance of building trust with one another. And it's more than the trust exercise where you close your eyes and fall back and, excuse me, you hope people will catch you. It's a trust that's not just for the moment. It's a trust that understands that life is a challenge as much as it is winning the Olympic gold of whatever. We live with both. We don't live with one or the other. And if we can find ways of engaging one another that are foundationally built on creating trust. Now the challenge is, undergraduates, 4 years, maybe 5 or 6 if they linger. In Divinity School, 3, 4, 5 sometimes. So we have to learn different model building for trust for short-term relationships that give folks the foundation to go into life and can build longer-term relationships of trust. So I don't want to suggest that we don't need to change something in that trust building, because we do. We're on a short timeline. And Shatika is saying, wrap up, one more question. Allie, were you trying to?
I did have a question. Thank you, Dean Towns, and it follows a little bit on your question, Mark. And I was hoping you would talk a little bit more about empathy, and in fact, you may have just answered this, but is it one size fits all? And when exposing ourselves to difference might entail exposing ourselves to danger, what do we do?
Be wise as serpents. I think one of the things we also have to do as we're growing is to recognize our skill set at that time. There are things I can do today that as an 18-year-old I couldn't even envision being able to do, like patience. I'm amazed at myself sometimes. But what we have to learn is what we can and cannot do in that moment. Not all of us, as is evidenced by history already, not all of us can be a Mother Teresa, a Martin Luther King Jr., a Howard Thurman, a Dorothy Day. Not all of us can do that. The question is, what can we do? And how can we push ourselves toward that? There's a amount of realism built into that. Because frankly, there's some people who try to do stuff they shouldn't try and they make it worse. And when you add danger, because I know you have lived your life in dangerous places from time to time, you don't go in there like an innocent going, oh, God will protect me. No, you learn how to be safe, or safer, as safe as you can be in those environments. Realizing that at a certain point, yes, I must trust. But you're not dumb about it. You're very educated about it. And I think that's one of the things that I try, that's so important, to shift it to an academic environment when students are really wanting to make a difference in the institutions in which they sit. And it can get dangerous. You can get marked. You can get labeled. All those things can happen. But do that with an awareness of the consequences, the potential and the real, and make some decisions. Don't be naive, is the word I'm looking for, when we enter those places of change and growth. Try to have as realistic a picture of what might happen, what you want to have happen, and then what's plan B and plan C. Because often we don't have backup plans when we're trying to be justice seekers. We go in one way and one way only, and then that doesn't work, you end up, well, I won't say that, but you end up jaded, cynical, depressed, and not voting. I cleaned that up as much as I could. You've always, this is another Marion Ross Townsism, always have at least 2 backup plans. And be willing to change and adapt them. I want to thank you this morning for a really wonderful way to wake up to the day. I'm usually up at this time, but I'm usually not talking this much. But I thank you for coming out this morning. And Shatika, when is the next?
Well, we're still working on the date because this was Dr. Andrews, but today we have one and but it will be in November, so look for
Okay.
very soon.
Okay. And I wanted to ask you to join me in thanking Shatika Brown, who makes all things possible. I don't do this work alone. Please have a good and safe day.